Arte Merritt. Welcome to Botcasters. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Arte Merritt. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer for a startup called Bespoken that does conversational AI testing. And prior to this, I was at AWS leading the conversational AI partnerships. And before that, I was the founder and CEO of an analytics platform for chatbots and voice assistants, which grew to about process over 90 billion messages.
Wow, that's a lot. Yeah. Bespoken, could you tell me a little bit more about them?
Yeah, so we do testing of conversational AI, both the voice IVR solutions as well as text-based chatbots. And there's different types of testing, like functional testing to see how people are interacting, how's the chatbot or IVR responding. There's load testing, so how does the IVR handle load and overflows. There's accuracy testing around, say, the accuracy of your ASR or your NLU.
And if you look at a lot of chatbots that are around, what is your opinion on the quality of testing on the chatbots we see around?
Yeah, I think that it's something that maybe folks should put more effort in than they do. Like, it's often maybe an afterthought. I remember I was chatting with a brand. This is long before I joined, and just said, what do you guys use for testing? Should you do testing? And he said, well, I hope my team is testing, but I'm pretty sure they're not, right? So that's why maybe the experiences aren't. Some of them aren't quite what people are expecting. The other thing is just the data is so valuable. The analytics, looking at how people are interacting so you can improve the experiences, that's quite important as well.
Can you walk me through the process of of course, I know about the testing, but can you walk me through the process of testing, how you guys do it?
Oh, sure. So with Bespoken, with the functional testing, it's pretty easy to get set up. There's a dashboard interface where you say it's an IVR, you just say, here's the phone number of the IVR, this is what the first thing I want to say to the IVR, this is what I'm expecting it to respond with, and you kind of fill these things out, and you press basically play, run, and it will simulate the call. So it uses text-to-speech engines, and you can choose whichever one you want and whichever language you like, any of that kind of stuff. Speaks to the IVR, see how's the IVR responding, and see if that actually matches up with what you're expecting, and then alert you if there are errors. So you can have peace of mind knowing that your IVR is up and running and it's responding the way you intended it to.
And is that like a continuous process?
You can have it. You can set it up to be continuous monitoring. Definitely. So some folks might do an initial test before they deploy, and then as you have a live experience out there, maybe you monitor it, once a day or a couple times a day or once a week, and you get those automated alerts. And then you can do the load testing, which basically, like it says, hit it with a bunch of calls or a whole bunch of people trying to text to the chatbot and see how the solution responds. Can it handle that load or not?
And now a tricky one. Is the simulation you do, is it human-like, and how do you know that whatever you do is also what the actual customer does?
Oh, right. So the tests that are run are basically like a QA engineer, somebody would come up with what to say to the chatbot. So you could come up with phrases, maybe take some, looking at the existing data, what people have said to your IVR in the past, and use some of those. Or this is where an LLM could be interesting too, to generate some variations of what you want to say to the IVR, but then you're expecting a particular response back. Whether that's fixed or even if it's variable, you can specify the different options that would potentially change, so you can see if it's responding correctly or not.
But how does that work if the chatbot uses an LLM? So you don't know what it's going to answer. So how do you test it then?
Yeah, that's an interesting use case, because this is all happening so fast now with the LLMs. I think in reality, with how enterprises using LLMs are a little bit different, because it is your brand. So I don't know if there's anyone that has the LLM used in production to respond freely like that. Partly because one of the benefits of chatbots and IVR is like data compliance. Like, it only says what they program it to do, whereas a live agent might actually go off script. There are two areas where I've seen LLMs used that's interesting, people using today. One is in building the model. So when you're coming up with the training phrases for a particular intent, you could use the LLM to expand the possible training phrases to add. The other place is in fallback handling. So say somebody says something that doesn't trigger an intent, run what they said through the LLM to expand to different similar phrases and see if any of those match the intent. So I think that's something that folks are doing today. I don't know if anyone's doing the full-on production back.
I've seen some things.
Oh, so yeah. Oh, I guess you need to be careful, or you have a human to monitor what could potentially come back. But that's why, having some almost like wild cards in the response. So I'm looking for this, like certain aspects to be there, and maybe some of the others could be variable.
If you look at conversation designers now, designing the chatbots or the voice bots, aren't they going to be, well, that's suggestive, are we going to have the conversation designers in the near future because LLMs might take over the intents and utterances?
Oh yeah, definitely, because there's so much more to the conversation design, and that was the presentation that are showing. It's not just the actual response, but part of it is it's like folks will say it's the power of words, using clear, succinct language that's unambiguous, that's empathetic, inclusive, and that's where having a human looking at the actual responses, and then the conversation flows as well. Like, how do you onboard a user, set the expectations of what the chatbot can do? When someone does say something the chatbot can't handle, how do you fail gracefully and help get them back on track? Much like the welcoming, letting them know what the chatbot can do. Taking into account context and personalization is also quite important. The more you know about someone, the less you have to ask. Like if I was to call the airline right now, it would ask if I'm calling about my flight to San Francisco on Friday. It knows who I am and what I'm most likely calling about, so you can streamline that process. There's so much more than just the actual raw response. And then, if you take into account personality and all sorts of other things, I think you still need humans for that, but the LLMs can help with the response and help supply potential responses and things that you can then use as it's just one more tool to use.
And now you work for a company that supplies software to test chatbots. What would the ideal chatbot conversation look like for you? Or maybe you already had one?
Oh, I really look for the ones that keep context and personalization in mind, that it remembers what I've already said, so you don't have to repeat yourself or resupply the same information again. We've all probably had those experiences where you call a contact center and it recognizes who you are because it knows the phone number. It recognizes that, but then it will still turn around and ask you questions, your name, your phone number. It clearly knew who I was when I started, and then God forbid you get escalated to an agent and they ask you the same questions over again. So anything that really keeps track of that context and personalization, and that was when I was running the partnerships at AWS, we were looking at those 4 key areas. We looked at either ISV platforms or SI integrators that are building these. How do they handle use case selection, NLU model creation, the conversation flows and designs, the back-end data integrations, and then the testing and monitoring? So you look at all those things, and the very first thing to do is test the chatbot and see how does it interact, how does it handle the fallbacks. Does it just say, I don't know, or does it actually help guide me? Does it welcome me and let me know what I can do? Does it allow free-form communication? I ran a survey, and it was fascinating. Like, it was 83% of the users wanted the ability to either speak or write in free-form communication. So it's important to provide that. Like, you can have quick replies and buttons in the chatbots, but if that's all it is, that's not what people want. And you lose out on the data, because this is the fascinating part about this. Your users end up helping drive product development, because they not only tell you what they want, they tell you what they think about it after. And if you're looking at that data and the analytics and say, oh, I have a lot of people asking for this, or that maybe I should add an intent around that, it's pretty fascinating.
And what's the most amazing or most fascinating response you've seen by a customer?
Oh, by a customer or a chatbot or?
by a customer in a chatbot in the testing?
Oh, so when I was running the analytics, there was some, especially with Facebook Messenger chatbots, what folks don't realize is people do send images in. Like, folks, often people are just, they create the NOU models to just look at text, but people use short code, they use emoticons, they actually do send pictures in. And in the case of Facebook Messenger, some of those pictures were, not safe for work. And luckily, it was a low percentage. It was like, 3% or something of the images were not safe for work images, but people were sending them in. And in that environment, you know who the user is because it's Facebook Messenger. You actually know. And the funny thing is, the people that did that, the interesting stat was the folks who did it a lot. Like a normal regular image would get sent in just one time, but the average, not safe for work selfie was sent in, if I remember correctly, it was like five times on average. And in 1 month period, one guy sent his same, selfie, it was like, I think 156 times to
Why?
to chatbots.
Why?
Exactly why. It must be some weird hurdle they get over doing this, and they don't think anyone can actually see it or do it as a chatbot. But people can, if you have monitoring, you can see that stuff.
And what did the chatbot respond?
I don't remember what the responses to those were, but that I thought it was kind of funny. But yeah, so those are interesting experiences. But it is the other is mentioned. People do tell you what they think after, so sometimes not too pleasant. Like the chatbot responds, and someone swears back or says something negative. But they do say positive things too, like thank you and that was helpful. And there's a lot of data there, like these contact center chatbots and IVR are a treasure trove of data. Like folks often think of them as cost centers rather than that valuable data that you can learn from, because perhaps there's a underlying issue with your product or service that by analyzing those calls, you can see what people are calling about, and it's something you can actually fix. And so many of the IVR analytics platforms just focus on the numeric metrics and not the actual content of the message, which is fascinating.
So how do you analyze the content?
There's something called semantic similarity clustering, so you can cluster the messages coming in and start to bubble up, common themes. Like it's based on the meanings of the words. Like someone might say, "I want a refund," and other people might say, "I want my money back. I want my money back." So those two things would end up getting semantically clustered together, even though for a refund intent, even though one of them doesn't involve the word refund, right? So you can start clustering those and seeing what the most common reasons people are reaching out. And if you do an automated solution, that's where you can say those should be my intents and my training phrases and whatnot. Yeah.
That's a very smart way to collect your data and improve.
Yeah.
And how do you think the human testing, usually teams do, and the software testing match up to each other?
Yeah, so what some folks do with human testing, even if you don't do automated, there are ways to test. You can look at the visual flows, like if you're using a product like VoiceFlow, you can see the visual flows and just see, does this navigation kind of make sense? Sometimes people act out the experience, so some person's going to be the voice assistant, the other person's the user, and you talk, and does this make sense? And this crowdsourced testing too, but with the automated solutions, that's when you start to get into that functional testing at scale. So it's hard to do human-based testing to figure out all the possible options at scale like that. There's one of the customers I talked to where they have 12 people on the team, and to do testing, they all tried to call the contact center and use the chatbot and do all this stuff, but it just doesn't simulate the same as running thousands of simulated calls in to see how it actually responds.
For load balancing, I understand, but humans have the tendency to do something you don't expect. And if the team puts in the questions and the answers it should expect, then it expects the way they expect it to act. But how do you deal in the testing with consumers that do not do that?
Yeah, so it's sort of a two-pronged thing. There's testing the functionality to the extent that how you built it. So, prior to during development, prior to launch, doing that functional testing, and then maybe the continuous monitoring while it's live. But you really need to look at the data coming in to see how humans are actually interacting. With the analytics, we had a really well-known pizza delivery company using us, and you'd think they know how people order pizza. And interestingly enough, once you saw the data and you saw all the fallbacks, even they don't know all the possible ways people ask for pizza. So you really need to look at that data and feed that back into the model. So you can do as much as you can prior to launch and doing that sort of continuous monitoring, but it's really important to look at the actual live data coming in.
So basically you're saying that it's a continuous interaction between what actually happens when the bot is live and how you feed the software that continuously tests the chatbot.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you need that analytics piece too. It's that's what I was saying when I was evaluating potential partners. I look at folks that do the full life cycle, so help with creating the models, help with the conversation flows and designs, whatever different integrations, back-end integrations, and the key piece there is the testing, monitoring, measurement. So you feed whatever you learn from that back end, and it's just constantly iterative.
What does that require from the team?
Yeah, so it gets interesting, the team makeup. A lot's changed. When we first started, when I've been in this space for about 8 years, that there were folks that maybe were content writers, or you have engineers that I can build a web page, I'll just make a chatbot. And what the mistake a lot of those folks did is take what they were doing in the web and now just dump it into a conversational experience. And that doesn't quite work. Like, especially like all these FAQ related chatbots on a website, you have a lot of real estate. You can ramble and go all over the place. In a mobile app, you still have a decent amount of real estate. But when you get down to the conversational interface, you really have to be clear and succinct, and it's this whole power of words thing that folks often don't understand, at least initially. I think we've gotten a lot better because the space moved along, and there's folks that teach conversation design and best practices. But I think for any team, it's helpful to have a proper conversation designer on the team. And you see that at the larger enterprises that are building the stuff themselves. They do have conversation designers. It's an important aspect of this. And then having analysts that can actually, either it's the product managers or engineers or analysts that look at the data and see how people really are interacting, so you can feed that back in to improve the experience. Yeah.
So am I saying this correctly when I say that the data scientist on your team or someone who analyzes the data is extremely important?
It's quite helpful to have. What I often saw folks doing is getting the raw utterances or raw messages coming out, and you'd have a spreadsheet, multiple people are looking, like, did that go to the right intent? Was that what we wanted? And they're doing this in a manual process. So using, like I mentioned, the semantic similarity clustering, that kind of thing, would help speed that up and bubble up. These are the common things. So this is where it broke down, so you can focus. So there are platforms that help with that. If you do have the luxury of having a data science, that's great. That can definitely be helpful. Yeah.
Artie, thank you very much for this conversation and sharing your knowledge with us. And I hope everybody who's working with chatbots or building chatbots starts testing them properly, because it's really, really necessary.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I appreciate you having me on this and taking the time. I definitely appreciate it.
Enjoy having you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.